Hi everyone, and welcome to this month's Q&A. I hope everyone is doing well. We've had just an absolutely perfect day here in Toronto. I don't think there was even a cloud in the sky when I was out there earlier. So I see that there's lots of people I recognize already in the chat. We've got Lynn So Imperfect, Susan Book, Sandy Brown, Kathy Klee, Kathy R. Kathy's, I think you were born at the same time I was. Our classes were filled with Karens and Kathys all through elementary school. I think I remember one year being in a class with 5 Karens and 5 Kathys. Oh, Barbara's here. Good to see you. Another Brown, Josie Brown's here. Nancy and Nancy. Well, thank you all for showing up tonight. It is just, I look forward to these Q&As so much to see some of the old people and some new people. I see John is here from Art East. He gave me a sneak peek of his next year's block of the month quilt, and it's going to be a good one. Last year was a good one, but it's going to be a good one this year too. But I'm keeping my mouth shut because I'm not allowed to tell anyone until June 1st. Barbara had 5 Barbaras in her class. There was a lot of Susans too, if I remember correctly as well. But I remember running across people that had these beautiful names like Sonia and Veronica and Francesca and that. I wondered where all these beautiful names were coming from. Paula from West Palm Beach, Florida. So lots of questions have already been requested on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. God, I'm trying to remember these all. So I'm just going to start with a couple of those. Gina Stevens from Instagram has asked, do you have a preferred fabric material or do you mix them? Do you piece and quilt in 100% cotton? I would say 99% of my quilting is done in quilting cotton. I've included some wovens. There's definitely some flannels that have snuck in. There was a quilt that I made a couple of years ago with lame in it, and I swore I would never do it again, but then I made a mini quilt for a swap partner with some lame in it. I think in general, cotton's just an easy fabric to work with. When you get into mixtures, you need to definitely pre-wash because you're going to get different shrinkage rates. But I was talking with a woman the other day who was using like different weights, and she was using all recycled fabrics. And it just makes it a little bit more complicated. It's not that you can't do it. It just makes it a little bit more fiddly. And if that's the kind of fiddly that you'd like, then go for it. You know, I've always wanted to make quilts with velvets and silks and things like that in it. And that's just going to be a different challenge when I get there. And that's going to be part of the joy of using those. Yeah, I think it's probably going to be a little bit frustrating as I get sewing with it, but the final result will be a joy. Holy mackerel. We've got people from Texas, Chicago, Kansas City, Netherlands, Minnesota. I'm getting so excited about my trip to the Netherlands coming up. In fact, one of the people on Karen's Quilt Circle in the next couple of months is going to be from the Netherlands as well. Somebody has asked, I have purchased material for a pattern that I no longer want to sew. Does this happen to you, and what do you do with the fabric? It has happened to me. I've bought kits, or I've bought things for a person and then can't figure out how to use it. And I've bought patterns that I realize, you know, I'm never going to make. So when the declutter challenge comes around, I make that decision at that time. I don't usually make them during the year. And if it's fabric that I like, but I just don't want to make the pattern, I just put the fabric in my stash. But there has been times when it's both the pattern and the fabric that I don't like, and then I just donate it to my guild's garage sale that we have every January, and I just let it go. I don't worry about trying to get money back, but it could be a valuable kit. Like if it was you got one of the Free Spirit Tulip Pink packages that you're never going to make. I think there's some good resale value in those. So, yeah, just start over again. And actually, I think that's a good spot to be in, because as you grow, I mean, we buy all sorts of lovely fabric to begin with when we start quilting, but we don't really understand how to use it. And we don't quite understand even what we like to make or what type of designs we like. So as you mature as a quilter, you realize, oh, that was just a beginner mistake that I made. So no harm, no foul. So you just pass it on to somebody that can use it. Sonia Linos on Facebook says, when quilting on a domestic machine, should you use the same weight of thread in the top and the bottom? Could there be a problem if you don't? Well, you don't have to use the same weight in the top and the bottom. A lot of people use those pre-wound bobbins, and that's normally 60 weight polyester, and they often use a cotton or a polyester in the top, and it can be all sorts of different weights. When you get into different weights, you just have to be mindful of getting that tension right when you begin with. But there's absolutely no problem with using different, I shouldn't say there's no problem. There's no quilt police that are going to come in and say, no, don't do that. You just need to sit there, do a couple of practice pieces, and make sure that you're getting the tension and the results that you want. You may not get the results you want, and then you may want to either play with your tension or play with the thread types you're using. Not all thread works well on all fabrics. Different stitches like different threads, so that's just part of the discovery of your sewing machine. Yeah. Tippy Sadartas, I believe is how you pronounce her name, on Facebook has asked, any tips on the best way to manage tools in a small space? I did a couple of videos on small space sewing, so take a look on my videos about that. But the real key is you want all your tools to do double duty. In a small space, you don't have the luxury of having all the rulers and all the scissors and things like that. So you're going to have to compromise depending on how large your space is. So take a look at the tools that you don't use very often. Take a look at tools that you might be able to combine them together. For instance, I like to use an add a quarter ruler, but there's no reason why I have to have that. If I was in a small space and I had to make a decision on this or the other thing, I could easily just use a regular ruler and just put washi tape on at that and make a ledge at that 1/4 inch mark, and just have the one ruler instead of having two. The same thing with rotary cutters. You know, maybe just have the small one and the large one and not worry about the 45 in the middle. Don't keep, and yeah, I'm trying to think of some other things that you can combine together. But that's the real trick, is you can't buy everything of everything. You have to be very strategic with what you have and just make it work twice as hard for you. Yeah. Turn up the volume. Multiple comments are saying I've got to turn up the volume here. I'm actually at 100% here. Let's see if I can bring this down just a bit. Hopefully that helps. You can see the end of it, but I don't think that's a bad thing. When you make the microwave bowls, everything has to be cotton. Do you know of a batting that's fusible and 100% cotton? I'm pretty sure Hobbs batting has a fusible 100% cotton. Yeah, it's actually not tricky to find. Carmen Bailey from Facebook. Do you fold your quilts on the bias? If so, how important is that? So what they're talking about with folding things on the bias is when you're storing quilts for long periods of time, if you just have one grain visible on the edge, that will wear away and then put a long hole in your quilt. When you fold things on the bias, hopefully you're hitting across the cross grain, and that's harder to wear away. Or when it does wear away, when you get a small hole, it doesn't damage a lot of the quilt. It only damages that small little bit. But also when we sew our blocks, our grain gets all different different orientations and things like that. And it also has to do with what kind of quilt it is that you're using. Is this your utility quilt that you have on your bed every day, or is this your grandmother's quilt of the Irish, what is that? I'm going to say three patch. This Irish chain. Sorry, just lost that thought for. So it could be something that's more valuable, something that's more intricate that you want to store and make sure it doesn't get damaged, and those ones you would sew on the bias. But right at the moment, I don't have any of those heirloom quilts. My quilts are either on beds, or they're to be used in the car or around the campfire or on the couch. So I don't worry about folding those on the bias. This is from YouTube. Do you struggle to long arm pieced backings? Any tricks? I don't struggle with it, but the real key, and I say it all the time in the videos that I make about backings, is your back has to be flat. That's the real key. Your back must be flat. And there are different places where you can have a lot of seams come together, both on the top and on the bottom. So I don't do a lot of intricate custom quilting on the top when I have a piece back, or I'll have it in select areas. Like if I'm just doing a belly band or just one band down the middle with the piecing. And that's normally the way I do it. I have two great big pieces of some fabric going down the sides or on the top and the bottom, and I have a band in the middle. It just depends on how many scraps I have left over. And just understand that that's where the bulk is going to be. And you make your strategic decisions on how you quilt, knowing that you have that piece backing. So I just did a really big quilt, a fairly intricate one. It just had a small band down the middle, and there was really no exceptions that I had to make to what was on the top, because the piecing that was in this band was very lightly done. It wasn't, like 20 layers coming together at one time. And the quilt on the top had really big pieces. And the patterns, a lot of people worry about whether the pattern on the back will match the pattern on the front, and just don't worry about the back. Like, it's the back of the quilt, right? You're just using up your excess scraps and everything, and it's just too much of a struggle, especially for a beginner quilter, to try and match the front and the top. It's just too hard. So, and while you're quilting, layers migrate over top of each other. So even if it's perfect when you put it down, it will not be perfect after you quilt it. So just not worry about perfection on the back. It is what it is, and just have fun quilting the top. Okay, Jean Branch has asked, do you have any tips on pairing... 7:14 p.m. Sorry, that was my watch. Do I have any tips on pairing patterns with your stash? I'm afraid of making something a cluttered mess. Well, I did a video, I think it's pretty sure it's the fourth one in the color series, and that's where you start. I also did another video called Too Afraid to Cut, and that will also have some points in there. But the real trick is taking a look at the pattern and seeing where the dark areas are and where the light areas are. Don't look at the color, just look at light and dark. And you can take your phone and turn it to the black and white settings and just take a picture of the pattern. And that will tell you where the lights and darks are. And then you go to your fabric and you choose darks, lights, and mediums in the proportions that there are in the quilt, and start from there. And the other thing that I like to do is I like to make templates out of cardboard, just so they're the same size as the pieces that I'm going to use in the quilt, because a piece of fabric can look gorgeous in a great big, you know, fat quarter. You've got these beautiful designs, but then you end up cutting it down into a half square triangle that's 3 by 3, and you lose that whole motif. So you want to also see whether you have patterns that work at the scale that you're working at. And you just have to try. Part of being a beginner is just experimenting and seeing, oh, that worked, that didn't work, that worked, that didn't work, and taking those skills forward. Yeah. Judy Wind has asked, what's my favorite type of patchwork technique? I don't really have a favorite, but I definitely go through seasons. There was a time when I really liked making English paper piecing. If you asked me a couple of months ago whether I like paper piecing, like foundation paper piecing, I would have said it's not my favorite, but I've been doing a heck of a lot of it in the last 3 months and enjoying myself. So you will go through times in all of those things. I do like making sampler blocks. And what have I haven't done much applique, but I enjoy it when I do it. I don't think a Baltimore Star or any Baltimore quilt is in my future anytime soon, but I don't mind hand sewing the binding on. Yeah, I did take a hand sewing class and realized I really don't like hand sewing to piece a block. I would prefer just to do that on the sewing machine. And I do not have any kind of skill in hand quilting, so that's something I still need to bring up. Lynn Heron has asked, when she begins to quilt her quilt set, which the top goes wonky from the bottom, why does this happen? I do not pin it enough. What do you think? Well, it's pretty hard to manage that quilt sandwich. Part of it is you didn't pin it enough, but it's also a negotiation between the top and the bottom. So you lay out the bottom, you tack it down with some masking tape so it won't shift. Then you put the batting on top and you make it flat. And then you put the top on it and make that flat. And then you flip it over and it's got all sorts of creases in it. So sometimes you have to go back and forth a couple of times to make sure it's flat before you start. And as you're feeding that, if you're using it on a domestic machine, as you're feeding it through your machine, you constantly have to check that you haven't, in the position that you've wrangled it in, you haven't introduced any creases. So there's a part of that where you just have to slow down and take it step by step and step by step. And it's not a bad idea just to run a good basting stitch through the top and through the center, just so things are not shifting. But there's shifting that happens just naturally because of the way that you're moving those 3 layers through the machine. So that's why you always work either from the in out or from one side down to the bottom, so that you're constantly just moving that bulk all in the same direction. If you start from this side and then from this side, then you're going to have that extra bulk in the middle, and that will cause creases as well. Besides using a 90 needle and a 50 weight thread and going slowly, how can I stop my BSR on a Bernita from skipping stitches when I go backwards? All machines struggle going backwards, even long arm machines. Going backwards and sideways, it's just not the natural timing of the machine. I've never heard of that stopping. Part of it can be that you're pushing too quickly. I've got a super sticker from Lynn. Thank you very much. And yeah, the skip stitches is a tricky one, because a skip stitch, what it means is that your thread has not gone down through your fabric enough so that your bottom bobbin can hook it. So I would actually maybe try going down a weight. I would go down to a 60 weight thread and see whether that does anything better. Make sure your needle is a quilting thread, so it's sharp and it's piercing, and try that. But other than that, I would check with your dealer if you continue to struggle. You want somebody else to try it and see whether the results are repeated with someone else. Kathy McAfee from YouTube has asked, pros and cons for long arm and domestic machine about pressing open or to the dark side. I think that's a pretty big question. So I think what she's asking is, if you press open or press to the dark side, is there any difference between doing it in a long arm or domestic machines? So pressing open gives you flatter results, whether it's on a long arm or a domestic sewing machine. It can just give a flatter look. But for me, the reason why I don't do it is because when that seam opens, and at some point, somewhere in your quilt, it's going to do that, immediately the batting from underneath will be exposed. And we know batting just likes to come out, right? So the repair to that type of thing is a little bit more difficult than if things are tucked to one side where you've got that extra layer. You can see the hole, but you have a little bit of time before you need to get a needle and thread and actually tack it down again. There's people, it's just one of these big divides in quilting. You either press open or you press to the side. Very rarely do people mix those up. So you just find which one works for you. I find pressing open extremely fiddly, and I find it very more difficult to get the accuracy I want. But I know there's people in this chat who love to press open and have no problem meeting up, getting their points to stay pointy. So I'm sure we should have a lively discussion in the chat here about whether you press open or press to the side. Elaine Lazard-Dill has asked, how do you decide the quilting pattern when you have lots of little triangles in the top? What size, type of needle and threads do you use to quilt on a domestic? So, before you decide on your pattern, you've got to realize what skill level you have. Do you have the skill to do something more elaborate? Because lots of little triangles, you can easily just do edge-to-edge quilting over everything, whether there's lots of little triangles or not. I'm doing edge-to-edge quilting on a quilt right now that's on a point, so everything is oriented the other way. When you start doing lots of little triangles, it's going to take you longer and longer to do it. So before you even decide on your pattern, decide how much time do you want to invest and what kind of skill level do you have, because you can easily get bogged down by being wrong with one of those two, going way too intricate and just kind of kicking yourself for taking 50 hours to do what you should have just done in 5, or attempting something that you just don't know how to do. Not to say that you shouldn't do it. If you have never done it before and it has lots of little triangles on it, make yourself a tester block and just see whether you like the technique before you invest the time in a bigger quilt. But you know, if you want to do a tricky pattern, go for it, because you're going to build your skills that way as well. Tracy Florio is here. Tracy is en route to Alaska. Or are you there already, Tracy? She's going to spend the summer in Alaska. She's going there from Florida, so it should be an interesting time for a summer quilt. Do you have a favorite way to batting? Would a generally lightweight fleece blanket work? When I ask this of people that work for batting companies, they always say go to wool or go to polyester when you're making a summer quilt because they release moisture better than cotton does. So I'm just going to repeat what their advice to me is. Now, there's many people that when they make their summer quilts, they don't even put anything in them, or they put a piece of flannel in it just to keep the weight light. Yeah. Amy Stassa says, have you ever made a Celtic knot quilt? No, I have not. It's just a quick answer there. There's so many quilts, so little time. Jane Corder has asked, when you machine quilt, where in the quilt do you start? I've already answered that earlier in the Q&A. You either start in the middle and work outward, or you start on one side and you work towards the opposite side. Yeah. And yes, it's great that she says that she's new to quilting and experimenting, but not quite sure where to start. Yes, some beginners make the mistake of doing the borders first, but that just leaves that extra fabric in the middle. So always start in the middle and work out, or from one side to the bottom. Kathy Manning has asked, what do you know about outen? I don't know what outen is. Is that a spelling mistake? Is that by chance a spelling mistake? Sam Smith has asked, do you have any tips or techniques for quilting a king-size quilt on a domestic sewing machine? It felt like I was wrestling an alligator for 2 days. Well, I am just quilting a king quilt on my long arm, and it feels like I'm wrestling an alligator. It's just incredible, the weight and how you have to manage it. And that's just really what it is. You have to manage the weight. So you need to almost surround yourself by tabletop. Make sure you have something to the side. Make sure you have something on, not so much this side, but definitely in front and beside you to help hold that weight. And it is tough. So good. I don't know how you get it all inside that harp, but I presume you can do it. So start at the middle and work outward, and then turn the quilt around and start the other way and work outward. Anything else? Just constantly check in to make sure that your backing and your binding haven't creased, because it's just so easy to do when you're managing that heavy weight. Somebody has asked, I have 5 extra large men's shirts to make a memory quilt with. Good light and dark contrast. Do you have any pattern suggestions? I like the carpenter star and exploding star patterns, but I am worried it will just look like a lot of HSTs. I know I will have to incorporate other fabrics. Do you have any suggestions? Well, it again comes back to, what is your skill level? If you've just been handed 5 extra large shirts and you've never made a quilt before, I would suggest just using either squares or rectangles and just make a subway tile quilt. It also depends on how important this person is and the memory of this person is to you. So obviously somebody who's very important to you, you want to put the extra effort in. And I have made a carpenter star. My Stash Buster number 10 is a no-waste carpenter star, but that's with fat quarters. But I'm sure you could do it with your extra large men's shirts. Now, just be careful as you're using your shirts, just to be careful of any stains that are down the front. And I'm sure you can see what the underarms, the sweat spots underneath the arms need to be trimmed off. And I know people who've incorporated cuffs and collars in their quilts as well. So again, talk to the person that you're making it for and just make sure that you're on the same page what they want. And one of the other things I've learned making memory quilts is not all shirts are as valuable as others. So find out which one's their favorite and Make sure that's front and center, and then the other ones support it. Jayantha. Nice to see you, Jayantha. I did a podcast with Jayantha a couple of weeks ago. You can find it on her LinkedIn page, and I believe there's links on my page too. So Jayantha has asked, how do you get a soft quilt? Mine somehow doesn't end up very soft. So there's different stages of a quilt. It should be soft as you're making it. Maybe it's rigid as opposed to soft. Like if you're looking for that soft drape, that comes with just washing, using it a couple of times, and with wear and tear, they will get softer as they're used. And often, like if your quilting is very close to like really dense, that can often cause your quilt to be stiffer. But it will soften up with use, so it just takes a little bit longer. Oh, Jayantha, it's on YouTube too. Okay. I will make sure that I will post that again in Facebook and YouTube, Instagram for those who haven't seen it. After somebody has asked, after your quilt is quilted and before you bind it, do you top stitch 1/8 of an inch in from the edge all around the perimeter? That is called machine binding, or the term that we call it, machine binding. I've done a whole series on binding. So you can sew it to the top and then flip it over and hand sew it to the back. You can do the top stitch. There's a number of ways that you can attack it. You can sew it from the back and then flip it over and do that edge stitch on the front. And that is the way I do my machine quilting. When I want to do it quickly, or I want to have some contrasting thread on that top stitch, I will machine quilt. I'll sew it to the back first and then flip it forward onto the top. So take a look at those two videos. That'll show you how to do it. What machine needle size do you recommend to piece a quilt top? If you are just using regular quilting cotton, I use a 75 quilting needle. Universal, if you're just starting off, use up your supply of universals, but when you replace them with quilting needles. And some people quilt with an 80, some people quilt with a 70. It depends on kind of what you're doing. I know people who are making those really intricate Judy Niemeyer quilts. Well, I think she recommends using a 70 in a very dense stitch, but I use a 75 as my default. Annie US 58 has said, how would you recommend I repair the frayed edges of my great aunt's quilt? It's a grandmother's garden with a hexy edge. It depends on how much you want to restore it. I think if it's being used or it's still being there to make you comfortable, you can just square it up with a rotary cutter and put a binding on it. If it is a faced quilt and you want to keep it a faced quilt, of course, you're going to have to do more work. And that may be more work than you want to put in because you have to replace the fabrics and then hand sew that piece together. So my default, without seeing the quilt and seeing what kind of shape it's in, I would just trim off the frayed bits and put a binding on it and continue to use it. Ginny Guthrie has asked, is it advisable to wash flannel before using it as a backing? I do, just because flannel shrinks so much. Roxanne Wolf has asked, I haven't quilted for years and I need to make a baby quilt. Due to my tiny apartment, I am going to do my first quilt as you go from scraps. I can't even decide what size to make the blocks. So if you want to take a look at, I've done 2 Quilt as you go videos, and one of them is with strips, and I always say, just make the size of block of the ruler that you have, so you can use that ruler as a template to trim them up after you've done them. Okay, we've got some people here that oh boy, we've got people from Australia, Germany, BC. We've got somebody from China. I've got Jessica here, Beth, Brooke, all from my crew, all over the US, Dublin, Denmark, Tennessee. Wow, we've got a real international crew today. Glad you're all here. Jessica, speaking of Jessica, Jessica has asked, would you consider doing a curved piecing tutorial? I'm going to do it as soon as my curved piecing quilt gets on the docket. I don't think I'm going to make it this year, but I'm going to do it next year. The thing about curved piecing is you just have to, we're always so obsessed with lining up our edges on the side to make that 1/4 inch. And when you're doing curved piecing, you have to be focused on moving, like your eyes need to be 1/4 inch in from it, because the curve on the top and the curve on the bottom are 2 different curves, and you're just trying to align that sew line as opposed to aligning the side up to masking tape or something like that. It's just kind of a mindset. It's actually much easier to do than you think. Ahinka from Hungary has asked, just wondering, what is the name of the rotary cutter thing to sharpen the rotary cutter? I think talking about the rotary blade sharpener. The one that I use is from a company called Colonial, and I believe they're based out of Michigan, but I just buy it on Amazon. Now, I have bought the 60 millimeter, the 45, and the 28, and I think the 28 is a waste of your time. The blades are so small and so thin that I just don't find I get good results. Like my blade, often my rotary blade breaks as I'm trying to do it. They're just so flimsy. But I try to do my 45 and my 60 every time I sit down to actually use them. Like I'm going to be making a lot of strips or something like that. I'll always just do a brief sharpener, and we'll do 20 in one direction and 20 in the other on both sides of the sandpaper. And that's just enough to give a really nice edge to go forward. Susan Brennan has asked, do I float my quilt top when you long arm? Yes, I do. Now, for those that don't know, floating your quilt top means that it's attached at the top and you're sewing it as it goes down, but it's just all kind of loose. It's lying on top of the batting, which is lying on top of the backing, and the backing is rolled up on your rollers. There is another roller on the machine where you can actually roll your quilt top up. And some people actually go around and baste it all before you even begin. But I don't do that. I float my tops. Claudette Hall has asked, I am new to quilting. There are so many rulers to choose from. Do you have a favorite or the must-haves? There's no must-have until you accumulate your rulers as you're working on different projects. So for me, I always think that if you're making 6-inch blocks finished, you should have the 6.5-inch ruler. If you're making 9.5-inch blocks, have 9-inch finished, have the 9.5-inch ruler. And then there's going to be rulers that you like because they fit your hand. There's specialty rulers when you choose to make a quilt that will make your life easier. Some of them are like the pineapple ruler, and there's a log cabin ruler. There's ones that are the triangles of different sizes, but don't buy them in advance. Buy them as you need them, and your favorites are going to change. When I first started quilting, I bought a 6-inch by 12-inch. Now that's not really a good size for quilting because we need that extra ½ inch on it, but it just fit my hand nicely, and I was able to cut small strips with it, and I really enjoyed it. But then I discovered the 2.5-inch by 18-inch ruler, which I just love because I cut a lot of 2.5-inch strips, and it's got a good length, so if I need to cut strips, I can use it. I do recommend one ruler that every quilter needs at the beginning is the 6.5 or 6-inch by 24-inch, and that means you can cut that with the fabric strip. They started off at 6. You can find a couple at 6.5-inch, which is a better width, as I say, for quilters. But it's not that easy to find. But you can find that 6-inch by 24-inch practically everywhere. And I've brought mine to the studio now, so I have it here to use. But at home, I have an 8.5-inch by 24-inch ruler. I like the bigger width. And that's the long answer to that one. So we're at 7:40. We still have time for a couple more questions here. Ali has asked, I have an awesome English paper piecing pattern. Have you ever had anyone machine piece an EPP pattern? Any tips? Yeah, I see people, I don't see a lot, but people have definitely done it. It's definitely easier when you have bigger pieces to put together. They usually use a very fine thread, so they're talking 60 weight or less, and they're doing a zigzag stitch just on the sides. So there'll probably be a lot of threads to bury because you'll start and you stop in various ways, but you can do it that way if there's easier ways to make quilts than machine piecing and English paper piecing one. I would suggest trying to hand quilt the English paper piecing one, but if you have no interest in hand piecing or your hands are not strong enough to do it, yes, you can do it with a small zigzag and a very lightweight thread. Now, another person said they have a lot of English paper piecing. They've done a lot, but now want to try machine sewing a quilt. Can you suggest a beginner-friendly pattern? I have some experience quilting, sewing clothes on your machine. Go back to one of my Stash Buster patterns. Stash Buster number 1, Stash Buster number 2 are both great beginner patterns. Stash Buster number 3 is a baby quilt. And if you were farther along and had more strips or like jelly roll strips or things like that, Stash Buster number 7 and Stash Buster number 8 are great. Ooh, Cindy has asked, how do I get started with my business? I actually don't have a business. I just have a YouTube channel. I don't have any products that to sell other than my mugs, my merch. This is my merch. So it says this on the front and it says eat the frog first on the back. And for people that don't know what eat the frog first means, it just means do the hard things first. Okay. Just before, let me just see here. Where is that? I've got something. Okay. So, just before, I'll answer a couple more questions, but I just want to let you guys know a couple of things. So a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed an amazing woman called Rangina Hamidi, I apologize. And she has started a social enterprise in Afghanistan where women have taken their traditional handiwork, they've modernized it, and it's a way that young women with children or widows can support themselves. So they've got extremely high standards, and they're beginning to sell these things online. And it's just, this woman is nothing less than heroic. She continues to operate in Afghanistan despite the return of the Taliban. And she's really, really wanting to empower these women. I also had, last week, I had Carly Porter. Now, if you've never heard of graffiti quilting, she has an absolutely amazing technique and a couple of books. She's just coming out with her 3rd edition of her book, and it's attached to her quilting class. And I think I'm actually going to take it. It's in September. I'm going to miss the first one because I'll be in Holland. But I think it's time that maybe I try something like this. And last week, my last video was the magic of freezer paper. 5 different ways you can use it in your sewing room. And the one before that was overthinking, which it appears a lot of us do. How to stop yourself from overthinking. And in September, I just mentioned it, I am going to be doing a textile tour. I'm hosting a textile tour in Holland and Belgium. We will be spending the first 5 days in Zutphen. Then we will be going to Belgium, to Bruges. And then we will be going to Haarlem, which is right beside Amsterdam and Leiden. And yeah, we've still got a couple of spaces left on that. And I believe we have 1 space left in the Fire and Ice Cruise. 1 space left in the sewing class. And if you're not interested in taking the sewing class, there's plenty of room left on the boat. But our very first class will be the end of this month. So just go to my website and you can check out those 2 events. And I've got time now for a couple more questions. Somebody has asked, do I have any input on how to put 2 pieces of already quilted fabric together? It is 42 inches wide, and I want to put 2 pieces together to make it wider. If any help would be greatly appreciated. Well, you just use the Quilt as you go method. So with binding strips, and that is in my Quilt as you go video number 1. So just look it up on my channel. That's how I would do it. Adrian has asked, can you believe how popular you are? That is a loaded question, and I honestly can't. When I think of how many people subscribe to my channel, it's just such a big number. It's hard to get your mind around it. And on the opposite side to that, when I meet a person who doesn't know who I am, I'm thinking, like, how is the quilt world that big that with 400,000, I haven't touched you already? So it's interesting. It's interesting. Somebody has asked, when making pot holders using heat-resistant layer, does the aluminum face the batting or the back of the top? The back of the top. So you want the aluminized side to be facing with the outside of the object. So just think of like an ironing board. Like you're not going to turn that down towards the batting. You want that up on the top to reflect the heat. Somebody has asked me, any idea when you will do a new stash buster? I love them all and make them often. Yes, we've got 1 on the list of quilts to do, so it's just the timing of it. It's going to be a quilt for the absolute beginner. It's going to be nice and easy. So, yeah. Lily White Oliver, would you use a zigzag stitch when appliquing an English paper piecing section onto a background? Different people use different ways. That's one way. Some people hand sew it, and some people do a top stitch down it. So it's really just your choice on what kind of look you like. I would probably do it on a couple of small pieces before doing it on the big one, just to see whether you... That's one of the things that would be really good to do all 3 and then have them in a library. I had a video that I did about making yourself a library. And so you can return to it and say, did I like that? Did I like that? Does this work well for this? I've made a library out of binding, different binding widths. And I can't tell you how many times I refer to that. What size do I think will work best here? But that will be a good thing to do with that. Try all three on some practice pieces and keep those practice pieces. Okay, this sounds a little intricate. Chris King has asked, when putting in a narrow stripe in a block, would you cut with the fabric or along the selvage? It depends on your skill, and the little narrow piece is going to stretch a lot when it's cut on the cross grain. Not only is it cut on the cross grain, and that has more stretch than on the straight of grain, but when it gets down in size, there's not a lot to support it. So it does have a tendency to stretch a lot. But that doesn't necessarily mean it will stretch. It just has the potential to do that. So it's how you handle that. So again, I suggested it before, do a couple of practice pieces. Because even though it makes more sense to do it parallel, if you're just making a couple of stripes, that's a lot of fabric to cut into for that straight of grain. On my crumb strips, I put a lot of 1-inch strips in there, and I did cut those on the straight of grain because I just didn't want any kind of stretching happening. So, and that's truly what you should be doing for borders and things like that. But again, a border on a quilt can be 2 meters long. And do you want to cut or purchase 2 meters of fabric when you could do that with a half a yard? So it's a combination of economics and skill. Oh, somebody has asked, how do I begin processing my smaller than a quarter of a yard pieces? Well, I've done a number of videos on how I process my scraps, and that's just how I process them. So you've got to figure, the first thing that you need to figure out is, what are you going to do with them? What are you going to do with your scraps? What do you want to do with them? Do you want to make jelly roll strips and just make the odd jelly roll quilt? Are you wanting to have, like, is there a scrappy quilt that you want to try and make? Do you want to sort them by color and just make blocks out of yellows and then blocks out of reds? Just start with the end in mind, and then you'll start a procedure. I've shown how I process mine, but that's based on what I like to make. So I keep 10.5-inch squares, which sometimes can be used for some big piecing, but I often use them for the backs of my quilt-as-you-go blocks. I also make 5-inch strips, which sometimes get cut into charm squares, or sometimes they're used as rectangles in a subway tile block. And I can always cut them down into 2.5-inch strips if I want that as well. And I've also found, like, in the last little while, it's a good chunk. So if I need something for, like, if I'm making a scrappy paper piecing, I can go into those 5-inch strips and cut out things. Then below that, I have 2.5-inch strips, which I have 1,001 uses for, between scrap sampler blocks and jelly roll blocks and binding and all sorts of different things. And then smaller than that, I make quilt-as-you-go strip blocks, and smaller than that, I use for crumbs. And I've just finished a king-size quilt made out of crumbs, and I can't wait to show it to you. So that's what I do. There's some people that don't like sewing with the small stuff. Some people just make strips out of everything and just do jelly roll quilts. It's just the way that you want to quilt. You know, if you don't have the patience to work at a small scale, then just work something else. If it's less than a quarter yard, you can't really make binding out of, but you can make a scrappy binding. You know, just always, I like to have extra binding on hand because at the end of the quilt, I'm really tired. And if I've got some quick binding pre-made that I can just pull out and use, I do like using it. Okay, so one last one. Sandy H has said, please explain straight of grain to me. So a fabric has two, quilting cotton especially, has two grains of fabric. You've got the selvages on the side, and the threads that run parallel to the selvages is called straight of grain. And if you pull on the fabric lengthwise like that, there's not a lot of stretch in the fabric. Cross grain is the threads that run between the selvages, and it has a little bit of stretch in it. And then, of course, there's the bias. So anything you cut on a diagonal is super stretchy. So in quilting, we don't have to worry about it as much as when in garment sewing, because if you don't follow the grains, your garments are going to stretch in different ways, and that may be what you want, and it may not be what you want. In quilting, we don't really put a lot of stress on our fabric. We sew them into a block, and then the block gets and the blocks get assembled into a quilt. But once they're in a quilt, there's not a lot of pull and tug because they're secured by quilting. But what you do have to manage is as you're assembling it. So I always advise to, when you're making a block, to see if you can have one of the grains, whether it be cross grain or straight of grain, on the outside of the block. If you have them on the bias, and some methods of HSTs will give you bias blocks, some methods of other things will give you bias blocks. And it's just a lot of stretch to manage. So when you go to quilt the quilt top, you've got a lot of ease that you've got to work with. So that's really what straight of grain is and where it's important to quilters. Herlindy Clark has just said something very nice. Thank you very much. Alan Gilbert has asked, how do I get started with doing videos on YouTube? I think I've answered that one many times, but it was basically from a challenge that I put to my guild, and I volunteered to make a video on how to do the challenge, and it just snowballed from there. I had no skills when I started. I learned it all as I went along, and I still warn anyone who wants to do a YouTube channel that it takes a lot of time. Like, it takes a lot of time. And Roxanne has asked, is an HST a half square triangle? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It's a half square triangle. Unless you're in Canada, where HST is also the harmonized tax that gets charged on everything. Anyways, thank you so much. I want to give a big shout out to Gina, my VA, who's been working the chat for me and keeping dropping in links and that when they've been asked for. Just makes it so much easier with you there, Gina. Thank you everyone for showing up. Thank you, Lynn. I see all those thumbs up. One day we are going to meet again. Anyways, take care. Barbara, until the next time, love. Thanks, Barbara. Can't wait for our cruise. Can't wait. Anyways, take care, everyone. Thank you all for showing up. I just realized I need to do this. Anyways, thank you, everyone. Lots of great community in the chat. Thank you, everybody, for weighing in. Thank you, John. Always like when you're there. And everybody from the crew, lots of thanks you all over the world. Like, you guys have just been from everywhere. I really, really appreciate you being here.